Hi Airfix fans, so today we're hosting a special Sprue Talk. Today we're joined by David Morgan, ex-Harrier pilot of Falklands fame. As you, I'm sure some of you will recognise David. So welcome David.
Thank you.
And Luke has joined us today, our Airfix researcher. So we thought we'd take this opportunity, David, as we invited you in to just to sort of ask a few questions and sort of share a number of things with our listeners and viewers on YouTube. So I guess we start as sort of a brief overview of your flying career, really, and how you ended up flying Harriers, and sort of later sort of commercial stuff.
Yeah, it all started really because my father was a Second World War fighter pilot, flew sea fires for the Navy. He actually retired in '46, a year before I was born. So I never knew him actually as an active pilot, but I was always aware of the Irving jacket and the furry boots in the cupboard,
Yeah.
and he was still keen on flying, did quite a lot of gliding when I was a kid, introduced me. I can remember the first time I sat in an aircraft was at the Biggin Hill Air Show when I was about 8 or 9, I suppose. And there was a Spitfire on the other side of the fence with a Polish pilot. And my father hopped over the fence and had a chat to this guy. And then came back, lifted me over the fence and sat me in the cockpit.
Wow.
And that was the first time I ever sat in an aircraft, and it was a Spitfire.
A Spitfire, yeah.
So from then on, I decided that I really wanted to be a pilot. Had a bit of a setback when I was 16. They discovered I got a cardiac problem, an atrial septal defect, which meant that my life expectancy was probably age 35.
Wow.
So I had open heart surgery at the age of 16, actually 17, and then went back, failed my A-levels quite conclusively, and joined the Navy as a helicopter pilot because they wouldn't let me fly fixed wing, having had my heart cut open. Wasn't very good at that. After a couple of years, they decided I wasn't very good at flying helicopters and invited me to fly submarines. So I politely declined. Went and worked on a farm and applied for the Air Force. And eventually they accepted me as suitable for flying fixed wing, which went back, did my training on the Jet Provost. And then towards the end of the training, we got to the high altitude part of the flying, and I started getting very, very severe toothache at high level, which they put down to being a sinus problem. So another operation, which actually just made the pain worse. So they then took me off the fast jet stream and put me onto helicopters again. Did tour on Wessex out of Odium, doing a lot of flying in Northern Ireland as well as around the rest of Europe. Then I was supposed to do a ground tour out in Germany, finding off-base sites for Harriers, which was a completely different thing. And it got me into very close contact with the Harrier pilots out there. And I managed to wangle a few backseat rides in the Harrier and decided that's what I wanted to do. Wrote lots and lots of letters. And eventually, after about 2.5 years of letter writing, I got a message back from the Air Force saying that my Harrier course started in 18 months' time.
Wow.
It just so happened that the Air Force were desperately short of fast jet pilots and had far too many helicopter pilots. So they were trying to prove a route of retraining helicopter pilots to fly Harriers. So I came back to UK, retrained as a Harrier pilot, went out to Germany, and flew the GR3 out of Gütersloh for nearly 4 years, and was then offered the chance of coming back to join the Sea Harrier training program, which had just been going about a year, I suppose, at Yeovilton. So I rang them up and said, do you really want me back? Because I'm a chopped helicopter pilot. And they said, yeah, that's fine. It's like failing your medical. So came back, joined Yeovilton, beginning of 82. And when the islands were invaded, I was about a third of the way through my conversion course, done about 30 hours flying, just started the night flying phase. And initially I was told that I wouldn't be going down south. I had to finish the course, and then the following morning, on the Saturday morning, I was told I would be going, but I'd be going as an ops officer and not flying. And then Saturday evening I was told to go and pack my kit because I was flying an aircraft on board Hermes the following morning. So on Sunday I flew a Sea Harrier and did my first ever deck landing in Portsmouth on board Hermes, and we sailed Monday morning. All a bit of a surprise.
With only a third of your
a third of
Sea
my
Harrier,
conversion done.
yeah.
They never did finish the conversion. I tried to learn as much as I could on the way down. It took us a month to get down there. We went fairly slowly, trying to let the politicians sort it out. But by the time we got down there, I reckoned I was pretty well up to speed. And flew 50 missions in the Sea Harrier, and about 4 hours Wessex flying as well, because they were a bit short of Wessex pilots.
So it was all very beneficial then, the helicopter training.
Yeah, well, the captain would have had my nuts if he'd known I'd flown a helicopter. But I had the visor down and had my badge covered up so that he couldn't see who it was. And when the Atlantic conveyor was sunk, they had 2 Wessex came across to Hermes with 2 pilots and 2 crewmen. So it was flying all the hours that they could.
Yeah.
And I offered to give the guy a hand, and he said, yeah, okay, you sit in the right-hand seat and fly it, and I'll go to sleep, which is what he did. But I saw a bit of action. The first trip on the 1st of May, we used 9 aircraft to attack Stanley Airport, and the other 3 went to Goose Green to bomb the runways there. I designed the attack so I'd be the number 2 going through the target, because I reckon that'd be the safe place. The boss would get shot down because he's at the front. The back man would get shot down because they had their eye in, but I reckon number 2 would be a good place. But the geometry got a bit screwed up, and I ended up being last over the target. And sure enough, I got shot. But luckily, it was through the fin, which is about the only place on the Sea Harrier you can put a 20mm high explosive round and still keep flying.
Wow.
But it gave me a bit of a surprise, I must admit.
So you never went last again then?
No. No, not a good place to be.
No.
And never did a re-attack either.
No.
That's the thing you don't do.
I heard that when you went back to the islands, you saw some wires going to the control tower.
Yeah, I can remember dropping the weapons, 3 cluster bombs, and then diving into the smoke behind the control tower and going past the control tower with my eyes level with the windows of the control tower, which is normally about 50 or 60 feet, so, quite happy really. Only doing 480, 500 knots. It wasn't until I went back after the conflict was over that I realised it was a 2-storey building, and I was actually the bottom of the aircraft was probably about 10 feet above the ground, going into smoke where I couldn't see anything. I got away with it. I was locked up by another radar leg gunner as I ran out, but dumped our homemade chaff mod out of the air brake, which got rid of that. Let everyone else land first, just in case I couldn't control the aircraft as I approached the deck. But in fact, we got it back fairly safely. I did a rolling vertical landing, which was not an approved method of landing on a ship because the brakes on the Harrier were almost non-existent, and the deck was slippery as well. But I didn't know whether I could actually control it in the hover. So I kept about 50 knots of airspeed on and just rolled it onto the deck and stopped it just before the ramp. And it was flying again the next morning. So
wow,
job done.
Did you get the hull mounted?
I did. I got it at home in my study wall. I mounted on a bit of marine ply with a very nice brass plaque underneath it explaining it, and a picture of the airfield in the middle of the hull.
Wow. Yeah, quite the memento to have in your office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did they fit chaff after that? Because obviously it was a bit of a bodge job by you, I think. Yeah.
I did the initial design, which was then modified by the squadron engineer to be a workable model. And it was just 4 skillets of Sea King I-band chaff either side of the underneath of the air brake, and the air brake hangs down when the gear is down, and then comes up when you bring the gear up. But then if you open the air brake, it comes down 90 degrees.
Right.
And there were 2 bits of pusser's string tied to the skillets of chaff, which broke the skillets of chaff and gave you a frigate-sized contact at the back of the aircraft.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it worked brilliantly.
But that, I guess after the Falklands.
After that, right at the end of the Falklands, we had some ALE 40 panels, chaff and flare panels, which went where the back hatch is in front of the in front by the air brake. Anyway.
Yeah. Lessons learnt.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, and we also put skillets of chaff between the 1,000-pound bombs or the cluster bombs and the pylons when we were doing attacks.
So as soon as you drop those,
yeah, especially in the loft manoeuvre where you pull up at about 3.5 miles and let the bomb go at about 2 miles and then peel off, you left a huge cloud of chaff which you can then escape back behind.
Yeah.
Which was quite useful.
Very clever.
The Roland actually shot down one of our loft bombs and thought he'd shot the Sea Harrier down. But he actually locked onto one of the bombs as it came off and shot the bomb down.
Wow.
So we've been talking the last few hours about a number of aircraft you've flown. So do you have a particular favourite?
Sea Harrier's got to be the favourite. It was a delight to fly. Very, very demanding, but extremely satisfying when you got it right. And I ended up displaying the aircraft off and on for 10 years after the Falklands.
Wow.
All around the world. And it's you can make the crowd go ooh just by stopping and going backwards. And then if you do the steep climb up, people just look in awe.
Yeah.
It was a lovely aircraft to fly, almost without vices. As long as you weren't in the between 30 and 90 knots, if you got too much yaw on, it would actually flick over and kill you. But apart from that, it was delightful.
It was just that small thing, yeah.
Yeah.
As long as you were aware of it, that was the main
That's why
thing.
there's the little wind vane right in front
Yeah.
of your nose.
Would you say that your time as a helicopter pilot helped the transition to a Harrier, or is it just a completely different animal?
It is different, but there's a psychological thing as well. The big problem that fixed-wing pilots have converting to the Harrier and the Sea Harrier, and I guess probably F-35 as well to a certain extent, is the psychological, I'm below stalling speed, I'm going to crash feeling. As a helicopter pilot, that's nothing that actually figures in your mind. So you're used to actually coming into the hover and looking and picking up cues to keep you over the right place.
Yeah.
So that was definitely an advantage. It was just the little bit above 120 knots that I found difficult in the sea.
We spoke earlier about night flying and how you hadn't really done too much night flying out of Gütersloh, and I've got some history of Gütersloh myself, and my father always said, well, it was great being based there because there was hardly any night flying. You said you did 15 hours of night flying at Gütersloh?
In the four 4.5 years I'd been flying the Harrier. When I left Goodisloe, I'd done 15 hours night flying. We had to do one night landing every 28 days. And that was usually getting airborne as a 4-ship, doing 2v2 combat in the overhead and landing 5 minutes after dark. So you got 5 minutes night flying a month.
Yeah.
And then in my first month at Yeovilton, I got 15 hours night flying.
This is bedtime. It shouldn't be flying at night.
Yeah,
but so that being your favourite aircraft, then is there a worst aircraft?
The worst aircraft I've ever flown was a Hungarian Trainer, and it never actually made it into production, I think, because of the comments I put on it. They were trying desperately to replace the Russian trainers when the Russians pulled out of Hungary and Slovakia. And they had this horrible machine that had been locally built. All the super duper modern things like fiberglass and didn't have a proper instrument panel. It just had a CRT with a sort of head down, head up display type thing.
Right.
Very, very rudimentary. I took it up and did a few basic routines in it. And the first thing you do is obviously check out the stalling speed. And this thing wouldn't stall. You brought the speed back and back and back, and eventually it would just go into a sort of flat plate descent.
Right.
And it wouldn't stall, and the nose didn't come forward at all. And I said to them, you can't train people to fly on an aircraft that won't stall. I mean, it might be all right for someone, just landing in their paddock or something, but hopeless for a military trainer. So that was probably the worst aircraft I've ever flown. I've been very lucky. I've flown some brilliant aeroplanes. The Chipmunk, my first solo, was an absolute delight to fly. Beautifully harmonised controls, sufficient power to do some pretty good aerobatics. From then on to the Jet Provost, which once again was a lovely aeroplane to fly. Fantastic conversion from a piston engine aircraft to a jet aircraft. The Hunter, what can you say about Hunter? It's an absolute classic. I can remember the first solo I did in an F6 at Valley, having got out of the two-seater, which was a bit of a barge. I was lining up at the end of the runway, first of all sitting in a single-seat aircraft, and then realising there was a cutout in the top of the instrument panel where the gun sight had been removed. I thought, this really is a fighter. And then opening up the throttle, and the engine in the single-seater had a couple of £1,000 more thrust than the two-seater, and it was lighter weight, so it went like the proverbial off a shovel. And I swear it was about 10,000 feet before I managed to get the gear up. It was just going so quickly. So that was a beautiful.
I bet he was grinning ear to ear when.
Huge grins. Helicopters, flown quite a few. Never really desperately enjoyed any of them, to be honest. It's not natural. any aircraft where the wings go faster than the fuselage. And then after my service time, I flew the 747 for 19 years. And for what it's designed to do, that is a fantastic machine. It takes 400 people A to B. And apart from Concorde, it was the fastest aircraft in the sky.
Yeah.
Designed to cruise at 0.86, whereas the Airbuses are designed at about 8.2 or even slower than that. But super machine, took me some really nice places as well.
Yeah, I bet.
And then after that, I flew, had a Yak 52 and a Yak 50. The Yak 50 was an incredible machine. The G limits were higher than any fighter aircraft I've ever flown. When I first started flying it, it was +9, -7 G.
Wow.
I could then just about sustain +9 for about 90 degrees turn, and then you start going a little bit tired. -7 I never got near. I guess I used to use about +7, -3 for my display flying. And that was a delightful aeroplane. Russian built, very basic, very strong. Had some really nasty characteristics as well, which were very good for displaying, but wouldn't be very good for a training aircraft, as the Yak 52 was. There was no stall warning at all, it just flipped on you. And then after those, my Tiger Moth, the 1938 Tiger.
Which we've managed to,
In the front there.
we've grabbed one of our yellow Tiger Moths out of the showroom.
Yeah, it's very similar paint job as well. And that is something totally different. I have never flown an aircraft like it in my life. You tell people when they're starting to fly them, this is going to be a completely different experience. And everyone says, yes, thinking, I can fly an aeroplane. Then they get into it and you get, what's he doing now? Oh no, help. Because you have to fly it the whole time. You cannot let go of the controls. If you do, it'll chase its backside.
Right.
It's neutrally stable at best in yaw, divergent normally. So if you take your feet off the rudder pedals, it'll just do that.
It must be quite tiring flying it then.
It is, and it can be very cold too.
Even though the speeds are nowhere near.
No, you're cruising at 70 knots.
Yeah, but even despite the low speeds, it's a lot of effort.
You have to work at flying it, and if you can fly a Tiger Moth well, then you know the guy's going to be a good pilot.
You can fly a Tiger Moth, you can fly anything. Or
Yes.
stop with camel, but
Yeah, it's probably very similar. Probably a bit more torque on the camel. But you need to fly it the whole time, and you can see why it was such a good wartime trainer. Because you go from that into something like the Harvard, which has got a lot more power, a lot more oomph, a lot faster, but is actually a lot of the time easier to fly. I mean, you can take your hands and feet off in a Harvard if you've got it trimmed and read your map on. You can't in the Tiger Moth. If you try and use a map, it'll fly. And B, if you let go of the stick, it'll do something you don't want it to.
yeah.
Is there anything that you've not flown that you've sort of always wanted to?
Yeah, I'd like to fly a Spitfire because it's one thing my father flew and I haven't. I've flown a Mustang and I've flown a Yak 3. But it would be very nice to fly a Spitfire.
How was the Mustang?
The Mustang was lovely. It was like a Jet Provost with torque, is all I can say. And the aerobatics were just like a Jet Provost. I even used the same entry speeds and it seemed to work. Getting airborne and landing it's totally different. Getting airborne, if you try and use full power, it just takes you off the side of the runway. So you've got to really gently increase the power and get the tail up, make sure you're pointing in the right direction, then getting the power on. Landing, it's a standard tail dragger. You can't see the runway once you're in the flare. And then once you're on the ground, it can be very skittish, especially in a bit of a crosswind.
Yeah.
But actually in the air, it was a lovely machine.
Well, fingers crossed you get to fly
Yeah,
a Spitfire.
My father flew Seafires, and he went solo the same week in the Chipmunk as I did. He was in the Royal Naval Reserves up at Whitton doing his weekend training, and there was a air experience flight Chipmunk taking young kids up in the back, and he managed to grab a trip in the front seat and did a few circuits, and the guy said when they landed, "Hey, that was great, you haven't flown for 30 years. I'd send you solo on that." And my father said, really? And he said, oh, no, well, you know, talk to the station commander. So the old man grabbed the groupie in the bar that night and said, how's about it? And the groupie said, I see it getting airborne 20 times a day. I don't know who's in it, but if you crash it, I'll have your balls. And he got airborne, did about 20 minutes and landed it. And I came home from Dartmouth that weekend and was stuck on transmit, having just gone solo. And after about 3/4 of an hour, I sort of ran out of words. And he just very quietly said, I know it's nice because I flew one last.
Wow.
But he reckons that that's the closest you can get to a Spitfire.
I was going to say, did he ever compare it to the Seafire? Did he ever explain how that was sort of different?
Well, the Seafire Spitfire difference.
The
Chipmunk.
Chipmunk.
He said the handling characteristics were very, very similar. Obviously, it doesn't have the power, it doesn't have the speed.
No.
But he said that the handling characteristics, he said you get into it and it just feels right.
Indeed, yeah. I guess so. We've covered off the wish list, which I expected you to say Spitfire, but equally, I had no idea whether you've been lucky enough to fly one. So, do you have any flying idols? Was your father a flying idol?
Yeah, very much so. Although he didn't talk about it very much, as a lot of the guys didn't after the Second World War. But once I started flying, then we had the bond. He could understand instinctively what I was going through, and vice versa. And I think it was a bit of a shock to him when I disappeared off down south in Hermes in '82. It was a shock to all of us, let's face it. We'd been out in Germany. I had kids at that time. I were around 6 to 8 years old, and my son was the youngest. His parting words to me were, "Don't worry, Daddy, they've only got tatty old aircraft, you've got brand new ones." So, fair enough.
Without any chaff.
Well, yeah. One thing that we've spoken about a bit is the FRS-1 box art. So obviously, a link to you there, and for a mutual friend, you actually helped us to get it accurate by sort of describing the scene. So although it's not your aircraft, it's someone you knew attacking the Rio Carcarena.
Fantastic.
As part of that.
40 years ago.
I know. It's huge.
I was only 6.
You've aged well. Did you build models as a child growing up?
Yeah, I think the first one I built was the Chipmunk, and then as I went through my training, I built the aircraft that I was flying at the time.
Oh wow!
So I don't think there was a Hiller 12E model at the time, but there was Chipmunk, Whirlwind 7. Whirlwind 10, Wessex, can't remember, yes I think I had Wessex 1 model, and then Jet Provost, and I think I probably stopped at that stage because I was busy with kids and things like that.
Was it a family member that introduced you to modelling, or was it something that you just started?
I think I might have got my first model as a Christmas present or a birthday present or something.
Yeah. Did your father model or do anything like that after he stopped flying?
No, he didn't. No, he became a teacher, and didn't really fly again. To be honest, he did this little tiny bit of Chipmunk flying and a bit of gliding, but. Nothing much else. He came up with me in a few aeroplanes. Yeah. And he actually led the fly past at Culdrose when I got my wings there. He was in the lead Whirlwind 7 and I was the number 3, I think.
Oh wow. That's really nice. Yeah. I guess do you have any hobbies now? Obviously, loads of people want to talk to you. I'm not sure that's quite a hobby, but...
well, I'm the instructor for our Tiger Moth syndicate, so that keeps me reasonably busy with annual checks and aerobatics courses. and conversions and so on. But I try and do that as much during the summer as I can, because otherwise it gets a bit chilly. There's always work to do around home. I'm in the middle of ripping out a shower and replacing it at the moment. Grandkids, they're a great hobby. I've got 5 of those now. And something I've started doing since I retired is ringing birds, which I was looking for a hobby which was going to make me use my brain. And there's an awful lot of work to do before you're allowed to go out and ring birds on your own. In fact, it took me 4 times longer to be qualified to ring a bird on my own than it did to fly a sea harrier on my own. It took 2 years. But it is fascinating, and it actually gets me out in the countryside. And even though during the summer it means a 4 o'clock get up, which is a bit of a shock to the system. But you do see an awful lot of the countryside, and it's made me very much more aware of the countryside and the fauna and flora than I was before.
Yeah.
Even though Karen, my wife, is not desperately keen on me going to ring in the local sewage treatment works. I'm very well disinfected when I get
Not allowed in the house until the pressure washer is
To the people you mentioned being in charge of the syndicate as the instructor, do people get nervous with you checking them out? Thinking I've got David Morgan of Harrier Falklands fame in the back or in the front?
I've only had a couple of people who've mentioned it, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
One of them was a recent F-22 pilot I flew with, who seemed to be in awe of the aircraft, or whether it was the aircraft or me, I'm not sure. But having briefed him that he was going to have to start using his feet, which he probably hadn't used for several hundred years. And I said, every time you haven't got the aircraft flying in trim, I'm going to hold my hand up and shout at you. And he sort of said, yeah, fine. And within 10 seconds of getting airborne, I was prompting him to fly the rudder. And now the other rudder, now the other one. It's no coincidence that the largest instrument in the cockpit of the Tiger Moth is the turn and slip indicator, and it's right in front of your face there. It is the most difficult aircraft to fly in trim the whole time.
And so you fly from Compton Alice?
Yes.
Quite a nice little airfield, I imagine.
Lovely. I think it's the highest private airfield in the UK. 811 feet above sea level, I think.
Do you visit other fields quite often, or do you sort of stay in the local area?
I tend to stay local, but we do fly off, for a coffee and a bite to eat in other little places.
Yeah.
It's a shame Manston's closed.
Yes. Yeah.
You could have flown down.
Quite a short trip.
Yeah, the only problem with the Tiger Moth is you're cruising at 70 knots, so it's actually much quicker to drive.
Especially if you're going into a headwind as well. You walk faster. You spoke earlier, you've introduced one of your your granddaughter into Airfix? You've been modelling with?
Yes. Yeah. Our 8-year-old has done one of the basic click together ones.
Yep.
And she very much enjoyed that. And I think she's going to be very interested in that side of things.
Brilliant. Maybe a sort of engineering or even flight.
Yeah. Possibly, and certainly engineering, I think would fit her.
Yeah, brilliant.
But she's only 8; she can be anything she likes.
Yeah. Well, we'll make sure you don't go home empty-handed today. I'm sure she'll appreciate that. Brilliant. Okay. Well, unless you've got any more, thank you very much, David, for your time and coming in today. Yeah, no, it's been our pleasure, honestly, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon. And I'm sure you'll keep busy ringing birds and flying Tiger Moths and
Showers in.
putting showers in. Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much, David.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.